Okay, welcome everybody back to the Dead 3 Coaching Show. I am happy to bring back Allie Warren, who was with us on our last episode, and we had a great conversation going. There was more that we wanted to cover. I think we both may have had some hard stops with that, and I appreciate the time that she spent with us and really helped me with a number of things in terms of just being aware of different things out there and then building my own belief in myself and some of the things I'm wanting to do and some of the things that she's really good at that I in getting to know her a little bit that I know I'm weak at, that I've taken notes on and I'm trying to improve upon. So it was actually a great episode for me. I hope that everybody has gone to either our podcast channel and has listened to that or will listen to that, or our YouTube channel where we are posting all these videos as well. And I'm learning a lot just about video production and blah, all this sort of stuff and about putting content out. So our windows are better this time in terms of the recording. So the recording will look better on YouTube. But with all that, Allie, I appreciate you wanting to come back on and spend another hour or so with us to hear your story and what you're doing and to be and continue to be inspired by you. So welcome back. And thank you for coming back.
Yeah, thank you. I think just to piggyback off, Ben Newman, he was talking earlier about, impacting through storytelling, and that's how you really relate to people. And that was the difference maker for me when I heard him speak, is like parts of his story I could relate to. So that's kind of how I go about my business as well. So I'm excited to share more.
Yeah, no. So I guess to go back, we are a part of this Ben Newman thing. We're not going to go into that too much. I'm sure it will be a theme kind of throughout our conversation. But if you're interested in what Ben Newman's doing and how Allie and I got connected, it's a part of the first part, episode 1 of our conversation. But Ben does talk about this burn. And I actually went on a walk yesterday and was listening to a podcast and was thinking about, for whatever reason, although Ben said today to keep things simple, but I kept thinking about, this is going to sound strange, but it made sense to me. But it was BPY. But I kept saying BPY in my head. And it's just a me thing, right? And sometimes I just get in my own head. But I kept thinking about burn, purpose, why. Burn, purpose, why. I kept thinking about those things. And I kept saying BPY in my head, with Y being spelled WHY. So, but the burn is without question what ignites him. And what drives him, what gets him up out of bed. And I'm still formulating that in my own mind and what that means to me and how that can drive me every single morning with what I need to be doing and to drive my action and results. But you had it was day 1 and didn't know you at all and didn't know anybody in the group, but you had some questions about how his burn. Which if you don't know the burn and what that is, go listen to Ben Newman and his podcast about that. But ultimately it is kind of a why and a purpose. His point is the burn ignites your burn. The burn ignites your purpose and why. And I get that. And I love it actually. And it makes sense to me, but ultimately you had some conflicting thoughts about that as well, about what that is for you personally, professionally, and your drive. Where have you landed in terms of your burn and what gets you motivated and ignites your fuse to get going?
Yeah. So I've unpacked this quite a bit. Like I segmented it, my burn professionally, personally, and relationally. And what I found is there's like this synchronistic theme among all 3 burns. And it's that drive that it like had to be me. And the issue is that the areas in my life where I've failed or misstepped, it's because I was fighting battles in which the outcome was not up to me. Right. So I think like in general, that is my burn, is the misapplication of that mindset. We talked a little bit offline about mindset and strengths and weaknesses and attributes. And I don't know that I believe in strengths and weaknesses as much as I believe in our programming, and that's developed through how, our nature and how we're nurtured. And really the outcomes are predicated on how we harness it, leverage it, and apply it. So when I look at just all these peaks and valleys in my life, the congruent mindset among all of them is it's congruent, right? The mindset is. So it's just a matter of like, I was fighting a battle that wasn't mine to fight, or fighting for things that weren't mine to have.
So, I mean, we're already, what, 5 minutes into this. So,
Yeah.
And there's a lot, like there's all these questions I have on that, and I try not to interrupt, but like the first sentence, you said something that was impactful to me, or I would have a question about. But what do you mean by you don't believe in strengths and weaknesses? I mean, I like that. I like that thought, and kind of the mindset of that, and kind of what that means. When you said that, I was trying to really think about what that would mean to me and how I would buy into that. But expand on that. What does that mean to you, that you don't believe in strengths and weaknesses? Because I say that because I just finished a book called Strength-Based Leadership. Strength-Based Leadership is the book I just finished. So what's that mean? What's that really mean to you in the core, that you don't believe in that?
I think that with anything that you identify as a strength, it can be taken too far, and there's a point of diminishing returns. For example, when I was a kid, I was obsessed with being the best. And if I wasn't perfect in a game, I would go in the garage and take hacks for like 3 hours straight. And I probably, did more harm than good. It probably hurt me more than it helped me to do that, right? And I'll expand on that in terms of some of the mental blocks that I suffered when I got to college, when I was playing ball there. But I think that if you don't leverage your strengths or your attributes appropriately, I have some attributes that maybe you don't. They're just attributes, but if you don't leverage them appropriately or apply them to the right circumstances, then they're not going to serve you.
That's great. And we talked about the attributes, and I'm driven. I don't know if driven's the right word, but I'm aware of that word. Yeah. I'm very much into word choice and how people use words, and the words that I use, and making sure they're appropriate and powerful and meaningful and all that sort of stuff. But I'm definitely using the word attribute a lot more. Just that it resonated with me because you're built up with all these, perseverance and courage and all these different things. I think the book I read, we talked about the last time, by Rich Diviney, about 25 optimal attributes. So I'm using that a lot more. And so I get what you're saying. You're saying these attributes that you might have could be strengths. So you could say, I believe you were a softball player. Is that right? Yep. So you were this elite softball player and played in college. And just, I think from your bio or picture I saw, I think you played in Chicago at DePaul, correct?
Yep.
Oh, I've done my homework. It all worked out. Right.
Nice.
So this idea of not doing well in a game, and then going to a batting cage, going to your driveway or a garage and taking extra swings or throwing or whatever it might be. Let's call that competitiveness, whatever that attribute might be, right? Or perfect, wanting to be perfect or anything. So you're suggesting then that could be a really good attribute, and you could excel and exceed in that attribute. But if gone too far, too extreme, can be detrimental to you.
Correct. And also and then there's certain traits like courage, for example. That is a muscle you have to exercise, and it can atrophy, right?
Yeah.
So it's just like you have to practice being in uncomfortable situations and seeking discomfort so that you're able to tolerate the feelings and the emotions that are associated with that, right?
Yes.
So my belief is with, certain things like courage and confidence, like it's a practice. And if you neglect it, then that muscle will atrophy.
Yes. I believe in that wholeheartely, about these attributes that you have, and then trying to figure out how to flex that muscle and build that up. This is maybe a bad example, but just on that point, it hit me this week. There's a gentleman that I follow, maybe you know who it is, named Lewis Howes, who does a podcast called The School of Greatness or something. And it came across, and I really like Lewis. And actually, some of his interviews are really good. All of his interviews are really good. This particular one, he goes, you have to use the phrase, what are the chances of, when you're in conversation with people. And he used that as an example. And I'm just piggybacking on what you said about putting yourself in uncomfortable situations. So you take courage to do things of, hey, Allie, what are the chances of us collaborating on this type of thing. Hey, Ben Newman, what are the chances of us doing X, Y, and Z? And taking the courage to ask those questions, putting yourself out there, putting yourself in an uncomfortable situation, like to my earlier from part 1, where I went up to Ben Newman and asked him to speak to our team. I didn't say it this way, but Ben, what are the chances that you come speak to my team? Right. That sort of thing. Like, yeah, you might get shot down. You're probably going to get shot down. This is somebody with his family, that sort of thing. But you're working on being uncomfortable. You're working on being uncomfortable. So that's, you always have me kind of thinking in our conversations that we've had about some of that stuff. So maybe I get us off the rails a little bit, but how do you overcome that? Like, are there things you did as an athlete that when you were too extreme on whatever those attributes might be, and maybe how did you recognize they weren't serving you? Did you ever go through a thing where like, whoa, I got to chill out? They're like, this isn't serving me anymore. This is hurting me. It's maybe not hurting me with softball, but it's hurting me in other parts of my life. Like, how self-aware were you with those things as you navigated all that?
Well, I've always been my own toughest critic, but over the years, I've exercised a lot more compassion to myself, with myself.
Yeah.
I think where I started to realize, the diminishing returns aspect of being too driven is when I would work my tail off and I had nothing to show for it. Because, for example, when it came time to, get in the game, I wouldn't show up in the way that I did in practice because I overdid the practice part. I didn't allow myself time to just kind of rest and recover. For example, I used to power lift, and usually 2 weeks before my meets is when I would peak. And then at my meets, I would fall apart. And it's because I wasn't giving myself that rest period, right? So that's an example of where I went way too hard. And, I felt like if I neglected it even for a second, that I was going to lose everything that I'd cultivated, right? So I think that's, as I got older, I started to really exercise more compassion with myself in that respect.
Okay, so I've got to go. Let's go back a little bit here then, because now I'm really curious on all this now. So let's go back to like, where were you raised again?
I was raised in Spokane Valley, Washington. Yep.
Right. So you were in Spokane, in Eastern Washington, Spokane. And how did you get involved in like this, like softball? And I just bring up like, how did you get involved in softball? Because at some point you played at a very high end elite level, right? And got your competitive stuff going. When did you start playing softball?
Probably when I was 6 years old, like T-ball basically.
Right. Okay.
Yep.
And then just played that all the way through. And then, what was that experience like? Like, what did you go through? Like the competitiveness, the drive that you had, these attributes that you're kind of born with and develop when you're younger, that you would then be a high school recruitable athlete, and you end up going from Spokane, Washington, all the way to Chicago, Illinois, right? So, like, what's that journey like? Like your childhood journey into athletics and what that built in you and for you and provided for you to end up at DePaul.
So it's kind of warrants going back to the start. I'll just kind of kick it off with my parents real quick. So my dad was, he was a narcissist, a serial cheater, compulsive liar, and an alcoholic. And then my mom also grew up in a lot of dysfunction. So she was in a really codependent place when they met, and they got married pretty early on in their relationship. They had my sister and I about 2 years apart. Shortly after my sister was born is when they divorced. And, my dad was just on this warpath to make my mom's life a living hell. So he would like try to take us from daycare when it wasn't his day. And I remember on one occasion he showed up, the cops got called, and my mom shows up, and there was a little bit of an altercation. And we were given to my stepdad, who was just my mom's boyfriend at the time. So my dad was pretty upset about that. And then the next time he would try it, he was actually successful. So we were at a different daycare. He came in over the lunch hour and said, "Hey, I just want to take the girls out to the truck. I've got some presents for them. I'm not going to see them for a couple weeks." So the daycare ladies obviously are like, "Oh my gosh, go, of course." So we left our backpacks inside. We walk out, And my dad just is like, oh, come get in the car. We're just going to drive around the block. And then he just takes off with us. So we were hotel hopping for at least 5 days, maybe a couple more. And in the interim, like everybody's looking for us, right? And eventually my dad probably ran out of money. So we ended up back at my grandma's house, which is where he lived. I kind of tipped everybody off. And then the last thing I remember is just being at a Sherry's, like a diner, and the cop coming in and saying, like, you need to give your kids to us. So it'll all kind of make sense here in a second. But despite that happening, like he definitely never tried to do that again. And there was a long period of time where we weren't able to see him. He continued to badmouth my mom from my childhood up until my early adulthood. So he would call her names. He would just make like crazy claims about her, ones that my sister and I weren't even old enough or mature enough to articulate. And the one example I'll give is when he would sing in the shower to the tune of Stacy's Mom Has Got It Going On, but he would say Allie's mom looks like Saddam. So yeah. And so that just kind of goes to show you how ruthless he was in his pursuit. And like, to add insult to injury, I was like my mom's twin. Like I was a spitting image, right? So to my mom's credit, she never projected that dynamic onto my sister and I, but doesn't mean there wasn't levels of dysfunction in her household either. So shifting gears to her, she gets remarried when we're around 5 years old. And my stepdad was a good father figure. He was present, helped out with our sports teams, but not a great husband to my mom. He had a temper, and when they get into fights, he would throw things, slam doors, and I can still hear like the tools in the garage hitting the floor. A lot of times he would go to the bedroom, pack a bag. We'd watch him storm out, and my mom would chase him and beg him not to go. He'd go for a couple days, and then he'd come back. And I just remember thinking as a kid, like, are we not going to talk about this? I mean, are you going to act like we didn't just hear and see all of that? And this was a recurring theme over the years. So what made that dynamic a little bit more challenging as well was the pressure to call my stepdad dad. And, you know, I think in both households, we were silenced in our own way. You know, I didn't want to talk back to my mom or stepdad because I didn't want to cause a fight, right? And then on my dad's side of things, he was like the Disneyland dad. So whenever he would, you know, badmouth my mom, it was always on the precipice of when we'd, you know, be on the way to buy all new softball equipment or go do something fun, right? So you didn't want to ruin the moment, right? So in any case, as you can imagine, my sister and I, at a young age, were conditioned to disassociate, people please, and we weren't seen and heard in a lot of ways. So once I got into, you know, sports and grades started to matter in school, I was obsessed with being the best because I felt like I was being seen. My mom was more of like that neutral parent, like didn't matter if I had a good game or bad game, she was indifferent about it. My dad, on the other hand, because of his alcoholism and his sort of like alter ego, if you will, his image was everything. And obviously your children are an extension of you, right? So if your children are thriving in their lives, star athletes, it makes you look like you're doing a good job as a parent. So my dad never disciplined me or anything if I didn't perform well, but I got like over celebrated if I did well, right? Because it made him look good. So that's kind of where that obsession with being the best came. And it was in everything that I did, but I happened to be the best at softball. So at a young age, I was like, it was kind of an anomaly how obsessed I was with being the best.
So though, is that something you picked up like immediately so you just circle back, you said you started playing softball at 6, right? So is this like 6, 7, 8 years old? You're like, wait a minute, I'm getting some recognition. I'm celebrated. I'm pleasing my dad. I'm pleasing, you know, et cetera. Is that something you picked up, or is that something like high school related?
No, that was something I picked up at an early age, and it was just a sport that I was always around. So I naturally gravitated to that sport. And I tried a bunch of different sports. I tried like every sport under the sun, but that was the one where I was just way ahead of the pack.
But did you pick up on the mental thought of, hey, when I do this and I play this sport, I get this recognition, this praise, or I get this feeling from my mom and my dad. Did you get that? Did you have that mindset like early, like 6, 7, 8 years old, or was that later?
Oh yeah, I was obsessed. Like I would go to baseball camp with the boys, and
Okay. So
it's
even
funny
growing
because
up.
even when I was like, I would prefer to go to baseball camp over softball camp because I
Mm,
felt like I was going to be challenged more, and it was more rewarding for me to beat the boys. So I was
mm,
always putting myself in arenas that would challenge me more so that I could be better and be more of a pleaser, if that makes sense.
mhm.
Yeah.
Was that therapeutic for you? Like when things weren't going right with mom and dad and split families and and not getting along and some alcoholism and abuse, blah, whatever it might be, right? Could you always find that peace on the softball field? Like, was that the batting cages, the playing catch with a friend and a teammate, or getting in a bus and going to a game? Was that your therapy?
Oh yeah. And also, it was the one arena in my life where both my parents showed up for me at the same
Mm,
time, right?
right,
Mhm.
right. So I don't know. I don't know how you feel about like that. Like there's a lot to unpack there. There's a lot
Yeah.
that it would take a while to go through all of that. And I'd be curious about all of it because you have me thinking, you have me thinking about my life, my parenting, et
Mhm.
cetera. Which I'll think about a lot here. And so what I'm curious about is how you feel about that as an adult. Like, is that something that you look back on with, I wish that didn't happen, regret, I could have had it better, I could have done this? Or do you look at that like, man, I'm crushing it as an adult and I've got this great life going on and I've got these people in my life and I've got this great professional career and personal life, and it's because of this stuff that happened? How do you feel about like that stuff that happened? Does it serve you now as an adult? And are you leveraging that as positive and momentum for your life now? Or is that something you look back on and said, shit, man, that could have been a lot better?
Oh, it totally serves me. Like
Does-
I trust that everything that I went through, I had to go through to prepare me for something more. I've always had
Mm,
this feeling within me that I was meant for something more. Even when I was a freshman in high school, I didn't want to go to community college. It was D1, right? My goals were always a lot higher than other people in my orbit, for the most part. But the beautiful thing is that my parents never actually pushed me to be great at anything. I mean, they modeled a lot of great things for me. But they weren't breathing down my neck telling me I had to go play a sport or anything like that.
mm,
So they did give me that autonomy, which was great. But with that, with my mom in particular, I felt like she never really understood my goals. And I had to be my own biggest fan for a long time and just know that I was on the right path. And it's interesting when you have a parent that isn't pushing you and you just kind of have to be your own motivation, and you know what I
yeah.
mean? And
Yeah.
so,
100%.
yeah, so it absolutely serves me, in my adult life, and I wouldn't have had it any other way. And as we get into my adulthood and some things I've dealt with my dad, that's when I think it served me the most. Um, because I easily could have said like, oh my gosh, like, woe is me. Why don't I have the dad that I wanted? But I think I'm at a point where it's all really starting to make sense.
Mm. So I guess on that, before we take the next step into, like going to college and things like that, um,
Mhm.
where I wonder where that comes from though. Like, I wonder if you're just, so I deal a lot in, on the side.
Yeah.
I deal a lot with youth athletics. So I'm dealing with, right now, like I had a workout last night or a couple nights ago, and we had about 30 kids there, and they range from sixth grade all the way up to 12th grade. Right. There are just some kids that are just innate and they're just born with this drive and determination and competitiveness and all that sort of stuff. And then sometimes you're not born with it. And then some are driven by parents, some
Yep.
are driven by coaches, et cetera. So I'm curious, where that came from for you. If you say your parents didn't care, you understand what I mean by didn't care.
Yeah.
Like they didn't care if you were great at this. Like they're not going, hey, let's go to the batting cages. You got to get in this many swings or throws or whatever it is. And you could have done better or whatever. Right. Was that just something you had and you developed? Was that something from the issues and the safety that softball afforded you, that, hey, you could escape certain things? Or did you just have a great coach that said, hey, Allie, you are this good? Because I'm kind of bent on right now in some of my Instagram type posts and the stuff I'm reading right now about belief and believing in people and getting the most out of people. And I wonder where that belief came from you, that you were great. Did it come from you, or was it nurtured by somebody else other than your parents?
So I have I don't want to call it a unique belief system, but I do think that things are passed down in our DNA. Like my grandmother is the most amazing human being I've ever met. She basically raised her brother and sister. Her parents were alcoholics, and she grew up in a ghetto in Montana. And when my dad was 11 years old, my grandfather left my grandma with 9 kids. And my grandma is the most resourceful, amazing person. And she could have been so bitter and just completely fallen flat and failed her kids. But she stepped up in a way that I can't even put words to it. And she raised 9 kids basically on her own. Some of them were out of the house, but still she had to wear many, many hats. Right. And she figured it out, and she never complained. And she's been dealt this insane hand that she could make every excuse for, to just be bitter at life and everybody around her. But she literally committed her life to service and just has the most amazing, like, gratuitous energy that I've ever been around. And I do think that, my programming has something to do with that, because I see it in other family members in the generation above me as well. But yeah, I don't know. This is a really interesting topic that I talk to my friends about, because I just have always felt like it had to be me. I was meant for more. Like, I just had that discernment in the environment that I was in, that, like, this isn't how it's supposed to be. Right. But some people don't have that. So
right.
That's it. Right. We could literally spend an hour talking on that topic. I think it's one of the most debated topics in terms of just our programming.
No, I agree. I have very strong limiting beliefs. I am very quick to talk myself out of greatness.
Interesting.
So I try to surround myself with people that kind of feed me, lift me up. It's this belief thing, right? I believe in that, and I do believe that's how you're programmed. I do believe, I agree with you that I think that is passed down.
Yeah.
My brother is a fighter. My brother, there's nothing my brother doesn't feel he can't accomplish. I am confident that I think there's great things. I think I have greatness in me. I think I'm supposed to be doing great things, but it's always hard for me to believe that I need to be doing this and taking these appropriate action items and steps in order to do it. Right. And so good for you that you had, a part of it, and just to hit on this, and then we'll get into what happened after high school, because we could talk about this for a while. So I'm good for you that you have this great model in your grandmother, who you could see has a bunch of bad shit happen to her, and you witness it, but you also witness this greatness, and you watch this resilience and perseverance and courage and, a grit, all this sort of stuff. Right. So you watch that growing up, and she has every reason in the world to not have any of that. And she has every reason in the world to quit and say, woe is me type thing. And so you don't see that. And you have this great model, right? Of greatness, right? There's greatness in the mud.
Yep.
Right. If your grandma's in the mud with all this stuff that she's got to carry, there's still greatness there. She's just in the mud. Right. Yeah. So good for you that then you have it in you, but you also have this model to say, shit, this works. This works. Right. Yeah. And then, so you're able to overcome all that. So good for you. What a great story. And I know there's all sorts of stories in there of resilience and perseverance and grit and courage and, you know, competitiveness and all that. So you graduate. What causes a girl from Spokane to head to Chicago? And how did that play out? You end up in Chicago as a, you know, 18, 19-year-old. And I believe, isn't DePaul like right in Chicago? It's like
Yeah,
right
it's
there,
right in
isn't it?
Chicago. So
Yeah.
I played for a travel sports team, got recruited around the age of 17, did a few visits, went to some camps and stuff. And I had actually verbally committed to a smaller school, one that I would have been like the best player at. So my initial thought going into the recruiting process is I want to be the best. I want to make the biggest splash. And literally at the 11th hour, maybe a couple days before I was going to actually sign, I got a call from Eugene Linty at DePaul, and he said, "Hey, sorry, I was traveling overseas with my family, but we'd love to have you for a visit." And I don't know if you've ever read that book, Greenlight, by Matthew McConaughey, but he talks about every time the fear kicked in, like that was his green light. And so I go on the visit to DePaul, and my mom's with me. And, you know, my parents, they played it kind of small in life. They never got out of town. They were very blue collar, very successful though, especially given, you know, not a whole lot of education in terms of, you know, post high school. So I get there and I look at my mom and I'm like, this is where I'm going. And she's like, oh no, let's think about it. I'm like, no, this is where I'm meant to be. And there was something inside of me that knew that maybe I wasn't going to be the best on the team, but that is what was going to elevate me the most, like overall, right? And I'm so glad I made that decision. So I verbally committed then, and then signed a couple weeks after that. And that's kind of the path that led me to Chicago and DePaul.
If you don't mind me asking, what was the other school you almost committed to?
It was University of Evansville.
Yeah.
It was a very small school in, I think, Southern Indiana.
Right. Yeah. It's
And
very, it's not very close to here, but it's fairly close to here. The Purple Aces of
yep,
Evansville, right? Yeah.
yep, yep.
And did you visit there as well? So there's a big difference between Evansville and Chicago.
Yes, I love the coaches, and the
Yeah.
coaches were at like every single one of my games. And so that's kind of where I gravitated towards. And I remember going down there and watching the team play, and I'm like, my travel team could beat these guys. And I almost got seduced by the idea that I would be the best.
So I love that, because that's, you know, the rising tide, you know, elevates all boats, right? That sort of thing. So you go to DePaul where you're going to have to work.
Yep.
You're not given any sort of starting position. You're not promised anything. You're just, you know, I know it's not this way, but you're just another player, that
Right.
sort of thing. Everybody's as good as you. And so, you know, the rising tide's got to lift you up. And so what was that experience like? So you go in there, is your mindset always of, hey, these people, like, were you self-aware enough at 18, 19 years old to sit there and say, shit, these people are better than me. Like, everybody here is better than me. That sort of.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. I think when I was going through that process of really thinking about what school I wanted to go to, I thought to myself, like, what would be more rewarding, right? Winning at Evansville or winning at DePaul? And winning at DePaul would have been way more rewarding because you're literally playing for a Hall of Fame coach. Our pitching coach was Kat Osterman, former Olympian or current Olympian at the time. So yeah, when I showed up, it was like a whole new level, you know, of players, and our coach is saying, there's no time for freshmen. It didn't matter if you were it didn't matter if you were a freshman or a senior, you had to operate on the same level as everybody else. And so I love that he didn't give us permission to give ourselves hall passes because we were new to this, you know, caliber
Right.
of competition.
So in thinking about and I coached small college basketball for 15 or so years. And I study organizations and I study athletic programs, and I'm always drawn to it. I'm interested in it. And that's one reason why I feel like I've connected with Ben Newman's content, right? And these standards that he's talking about. And so I'm interested, when you go there, What were the standards of that program? So when you talk, like one standard is, hey, we're not going to separate or differentiate between a freshman and a senior. Like if you can play and if you live to a certain level of our standards, like what was that program built on? What were the standards? What did you have to change to fit in, to be valued there, to be productive there, and to contribute there?
Honestly, I felt like all he cared about was your performance. Like he was notorious for putting in a pinch hitter when there were like 2 outs and a 2-strike count, on the existing batter. And then he'd swap him out for a pinch hitter. Like he did not waste any time. And he wasn't the guy that gave you multiple chances. Like you were either in or you were out. And he wasn't there to give people chances and, make sure everybody got fair playing time. Right. And that's what I really appreciated about him, because it's like it forced you to really turn over quicker if you were combating, a performance block or a mental block.
So it was a result. At the end of the day, this is what I've said in many of my podcasts, businesses, at the end of the day, you have to get results. At the end of the day, you need customers and clients. This isn't a hobby, right? If you're running a business, it's not a hobby anymore. So at the end of the day, you can do all this culture stuff and you can do all this standard stuff and you can do all this why stuff. And it's all really important. I believe you lead with those to get the results you want. I believe that. There are definitely organizations that say, I don't care about any of this garbage, because at the end, I need clients, I need money, I need results, etc. Right. So there are definitely people that roll with that. It sounds like, and it works for people, right? They end up being Hall of Fame softball coaches, right? Like you have to perform. You have to get the results that we need, which is winning, right? Getting on base, driving runs in, whatever it might be. How did your upbringing and the things that you may have gone through from, high school on and family and being now, however many miles that is, 2003, whatever many miles that is, I'm not good at that, but from Spokane to Chicago. Did all that baggage go with you? And I hate to use the word bad. That's not fair to use the word baggage, right? Those things that happened in your life, it's not always baggage, right? You say, your earlier point is that serves you, right? Those are things that you carry with you and you offload what you don't want and you keep what serves you, right? So some of that stuff is serving you. So it's not necessarily baggage. But did that go with you? And or were you able to offload that stuff did you leave it on the doorstep of Spokane and got into a car and just ended up in Chicago and took a deep breath and said, whew, all right, now it's just me. I make the life I want to live. I'm 18, 19 years old. I'm 2,000 miles away from these people that were disruptive to my whatever. And now I can just roll. Or did it go with you?
It went with me a little bit. I had a boyfriend, so we did the long distance thing and we mapped out this plan. We were both going to be pharmacists and graduate from school and go work for the family business. So, but then as I got older and more independent, that I started to kind of phase that version of me out and I guess the baggage with it. Right. But also, when I chose to move that far away from home, I just had this wisdom or knowing that I needed to get away from the dynamic that I had grown up in because I just knew it was going to hold me back. So eventually, probably like 2 years in, I would end up just staying in Chicago full time through the summers. But it definitely took a couple years to really get comfortable in that independence.
How hard is it for an 18-year-old to go from Spokane to Chicago and thrive? That's a big change.
Well, so think about it. I played on a sports team and I had been in communication with some of these people prior to, so I had like an instant family and network. That definitely made it easier, right? Yes. But like you have to have a whole different level of situational awareness relative to like what I grew up with in Spokane. So I definitely had like naive moments there, like you can't walk at night and stuff like that. So in any case, I think that it did help that I had an instant family of like-minded people all there for the same reason. that really
Yes.
helped in the transition.
Yeah. And another book, I'm on a reading kick for 2024, and I'm reading more than I ever have in my life. But I did finish a book recently also called Tribes by Seth Godin, which is a great book. But ultimately, you have this tribe. You have these people that are like-minded, driven, highly accomplished athletes that have kind of the same goals, outcomes, ambitions that you might have of playing for a certain coach, playing for a certain university, trying to be their best, all that sort of stuff. And I'm just curious, so I'm kind of all over the place a little bit in my thinking about what to ask you, but I am curious, like a college basketball player, men or women, is thinking about, how do I get to the league? I'm good enough. I'm playing Division I. I'm playing at DePaul. I'm playing for Ray Meyer at DePaul and all these, the famous DePaul people, right? And my goal is to be in the NBA. My goal is to be in the WNBA, that sort of thing. When you're playing college softball, what is the end game for an elite athlete? Like, what were you thinking? Hey, I could go to DePaul and I could do what? Or is it, I'm going to DePaul and this is over in 4 years and I'm done? What do people in those maybe, not the footballs and basketballs, but like, was your goal to make an Olympic team? Were you good enough? Or was it like, hey, I'm just doing this to be educated?
I think going into it, I thought, there could be something more, and I might serve the game in a different way following my collegiate, athletic career. But for women especially, unless you get a bunch of endorsements or you want to go play overseas, even overseas is not that much money, but there's really no life after college sports. Mm-hmm. And our coach would just drilled into us with grades. We actually had the highest GPA as a team in our conference, and year over year, because he understood that for 99% of us, we were going to have to go back into corporate America.
Yeah, right.
And there was no opportunity, to serve the game beyond college.
Yeah. Yep. No, I like the phrase "serve the game," actually. So I'm stealing some of this stuff. So when you're done, you stick around in Chicago. Like, I know you got into the medical sales industry. Is that something? You got connected with in the Chicago area, and just, being there for 4 years, maybe not going back to Spokane that much? This has kind of become home base to a certain extent. Now your network's there. You got DePaul people there, coaches looking out for you there. And how long did you stay? I guess that's the initial question. Is that what happened? You got connected in the Chicago area?
Yeah, I'll kind of backtrack a little bit. So, and kind of tie in some other themes, I guess, with my parents. So probably halfway through college, I think I talked about, I had this weird mental block where I just couldn't throw the ball anymore. And my strongest asset was always my arm. I was a good hitter too, but my defense was definitely my strength. And I never really fully recovered from it. But on the personal side of my life, I was really stepping into my own independence and my confidence. And I think I mentioned earlier that my dad persistently badmouthed my mom up until my early adulthood. And I remember one day I was like, I'm so sick of hearing about this. We're adults now. Why are you still doing this? And I just stood up to him and he cut my debit card off. So even though I had this full tuition scholarship, I still needed money. So that summer, I had just turned 21 and I printed off a stack of resumes. I went down to Wrigleyville and I got my first bartending job. Well, serving job that evolved into a bartending job. Mm-hmm. So over the summer, bartended, making great money, continuing to play ball. And then in that time period in between, let's call it beginning of junior year to the end of my collegiate career, my dad and I weren't really talking, but he had developed diverticulitis, which is really painful pockets that form on your digestive lining. And he would be bedridden from it. So that actually got him to stop drinking. And, and then as an athlete, the challenge that I feel no one prepares you for is that hard line in the sand when it's all over, because the lights turn off in an instant, right? And it was a huge shock to my system because all that structure and accountability that I'd had in my life for 15 plus years was over. And so I'll kind of tie this all together here in a second, but I found myself in a place where my only responsibility was to show up to my bartending gig. And for the first time in my life, I really had like nobody to answer to. So I started, hanging out with people that were a lot older than me, and I wanted to belong. So I was, partying in the same ways they were,
Mm-hmm.
using drugs recreationally. And there did come a point where I realized that, I needed to make a change. And shortly after college, my dad and I had also started talking too. That was when he had been sober for a little bit. So anyway, realized I needed to make a change. And I had a neighbor that turned me on to an opportunity in pharmaceutical sales. And so I went and interviewed for the job, got the job, and I'm on cloud nine because, despite having a little bit of a reckless period, I still managed to get my dream job. I mean, if you've ever seen the movie Love and Other Drugs, it's like being a pharmaceutical sales rep is like the pinnacle of sales. So it was really challenging because they would hire a big wave of people and they make you study disease states and pass all these tests. And if you didn't pass the test, you got let go. So probably a third of the initial class would be let go. After you pass your test, then you go to in-person sales training. And I made a very poor decision to overconsume at the final day of our sales training. I was actually supposed to go home that day, but I had my hotel room through the following day. So I was like, I'm just going to stay here and party all night with all my friends. And I remember waking up Saturday morning thinking it was Friday afternoon. I home alone it to the airport, get on the airplane, finally take a breath. I knew in my gut something was wrong, but there was no evidence that I did anything wrong. I mean, I had all my stuff with me. Like I got back to my room. And when I landed in Chicago a few hours later, my phone was blowing up. And essentially what had happened is I was intoxicated to the degree that it wasn't kosher. So the national director of sales happened to walk out of the opposing elevator as one of my coworkers was putting me into an elevator. And it was like that butterfly effect moment where if it was a minute sooner or a minute later, no one would have seen it. Right. But it changed my life. And I'm so glad that happened because I was in this state of like feeling invincible because I didn't suffer any consequences for my reckless behavior. Like despite being super reckless, I still got what I wanted when I wanted it, right? And I was always like able to figure it out. So here I am, I'm in Chicago, I get fired, and my parents have to fly me home, and my dad is pissed. And my mom's upset too, but my dad is like pissed. And I end up making ends meet, paying my bills, all the things. And then shortly after I get back home, my dad starts drinking again. He had met a woman that was a little bit of a boozer, but this time he had graduated from beer to hard alcohol. I'd never seen him drink hard alcohol at all in my life, but he would clear like a 24 rack in a night. So the problem was also that he was drinking hard alcohol in the same capacity as he was beer. So about a year later, I end up getting another job, and my last memory of my dad like being out of his house was 6 months into this job. I lived in Vancouver, Washington. I was sleeping on an air mattress, and I was so excited for my dad to come and help me like pick out some furniture and build it. And I thought, okay, like I've saved some money, but if dad's here, he'll buy it for me. And I was just really excited for that bonding experience to show him how I had recovered from that situation that happened a year prior. And, I had this really cool apartment. And so I go to pick my dad up from the airport, and it's like 11 a.m. on a Sunday, and he is trashed. And I had to just go take him directly to his hotel. And I remember going back there later that night, and he was like, I'm so sorry. I'm never going to drink again. And that was kind of my last memory of my dad outside of his home. So I eventually get promoted, moved down to the Bay Area. And around the age of 25, my dad was 50 years old. And my aunt ends up dying in her sleep. So I fly home, and I'm like, Dad, I'll come get you on Saturday morning for the funeral. And he's like, no, I can't go. And I'm like, dude, sober up. Come on. And he's like, no, I'm in the hospital. So I go to the hospital, and I'm like, what is going on? He's like full on hallucinating. And I go to stand him up because he needed to use the bathroom, and the nurse stops me and she's like, no, 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 he can't walk. I'm like, oh, do his meds make him dizzy? And she's like, no, he can't walk. And I'm like, is he not supposed to walk? Like, what's the
Mm-hmm.
deal? Well, the reason he ended up in the hospital is because he thought he was having a heart attack. So he fainted and he fell into his coffee table. Well, they couldn't run any tests on him because they had to withdraw him from the alcohol first. And he, in a 2-year period, he had developed alcohol-induced myopathy, which is where he lost function in his muscles, like larger muscle groups in particular. So his
Mm-hmm.
legs were really like wet noodles. And he looked like he was 250 pounds, but he was probably 165 just
Wow.
because he was so bloated.
Yeah.
So when I uncover all this, I am like freaking out. I end up making a bunch of phone calls, arrange for him to come back down to California with me to go to a rehab facility that's about an hour away from where I lived. So after he gets out of the hospital, which was about a 2-week period, they had to actually sedate him and chain him to a bed because his withdrawals were that bad. After he gets out of the hospital, I pitched it to him. I said, Dad, just come back with me. I'm going back tomorrow. I've got it all arranged. And he said no. So I went home. A few months later, he loses his job. And my dad was a national director of sales for a tech company, and he handled all the big wigs like Facebook, Verizon, T-Mobile. He was the GOAT. So when he lost his job, it was like his whole identity was gone. So he calls me one morning, and I was near the Oakland airport, and I just drove straight to the airport, called off work, and I went up, found him, and like just kind of ambushed him. And it was like Weekend at Bernie's. Like I had to keep him intoxicated and drugged so he didn't seize or anything. And I brought him down to the Bay Area with me. And I took him to the rehab facility, and they actually turned him away after that. All that work, they turned him away because of his lack of mobility. Their campus wasn't going to be safe for him to get from point A to point B because it was uphill. So I had to kind of pivot, take him to a hospital so he could detox, find another rehab facility, and that would kick off a few years of him going back and forth. Yep.
What a story. What a story. So what I'm thinking is you graduate, you're in Chicago, and you have your party stage.
Yep.
You also have your dad who's in a long running party stage, right? How did that impact you? So did that impact you of, how did that change you, I guess? So you like I shouldn't say most people.
Yeah.
People in their early 20s go out and have those experiences. Some go really hard. I did that. And then you either wise up or you continue with certain things and all that. But you lost a job, but you're also watching your dad disintegrate, right?
Yep.
You're just watching him just essentially kill himself.
Yep.
With this, right? Or not be in a position to be able to accept the help, right? So how does that affect you at mid-20s, where not that you're living the same lifestyle, but that you've had some dramatic things happening, and you're witnessing dramatic things happening because of alcohol?
Well, I think when you see the end is near and it's so tangible and it becomes so real, like my motivation to correct it or control the situation that really wasn't mine to control, that was at its peak. So I just remember thinking, if anybody can get him sober, it's me. And I had just this insane amount of confidence that I could figure it out and put him in the right places to get him sober. And I was willing to do anything for it. And so I would travel down there every weekend, see him during visiting hours. And it was a 4-hour drive each way. And he would do like 30 days, and then he'd get drunk on the airplane ride home. And then I ambushed him again, brought him back down. He was there for 3 months, and then the same thing happened. By the third time, his buddies down in rehab, who now I have a relationship with them all, they're like, oh, your dad just went on a bender. Like, just get him to the airport. We'll get the band back together. And by the third time, I was so pissed and fed up that I just literally wheeled him into the airport and just said, take him. Like,
Mm.
I looked at an attendant. I'm like, he's flying Southwest, take him. And so I had really started to give up on him because I realized that I wanted it more than he did. And it
Yeah.
was really, really defeating at that age. And that's where I kind of would hyper focus and like hyper control other areas of my life because I couldn't control this one. But
Ah,
again,
interesting.
the
Yeah.
outcome wasn't up to me, but I didn't accept that until I had failed a few times. So
Yeah.
then he does a couple more stints in rehab on his own, and then 2020 rolls around. And my dad isolated himself a lot to begin with, but this really kicked it into overdrive. So my dad would not let us see him at all, and he also started to become very verbally abusive.
Mm.
I would try to go visit him, bring him stuff, and he was just very nasty to me. And my last words to my dad, or my dad's last words to me were, "I hope you die today," with expletives in there.
Mm.
So I had to block him out of my life. And a year and a half later is when I got the call that he was found dead in his home.
Mm.
Um,
Mm.
so I'll pause there. There's a
Mm-hmm.
lot more to unpack as it relates to like kind of the aftermath of that. But yeah, go ahead.
No, I mean, boy, there is a lot there, and it's, it's just so interesting the things that make us and build us as human beings, right?
Mhm.
And these moments with the people that we love the most that are supposed to love us the most, and how that
Mhm.
impacts us at 6 when you pick up a softball bat for the first time and start throwing with your dad and start getting carted to games to where you're wheeling them into rehab,
Yep.
right? 20, 25 years later, how that still impacts you. you
Mhm.
know um, I'm 51 years old and still have moments and memories of my dad who passed away in 2020, I believe, 2019, um, of things that happened to me when I was 46 years old that still impact me at
Mhm.
51. My dad's been gone for 5 years, and there were things that were said or done or not done, or conversations we had or didn't have, or whatever it might be, and you're still just impacted it at 51. It's just that, and my dad and I had a good relationship. But it's interesting how that stuff just continues no matter how old you are. But how did that, though? How does all that, if you were to unpack that and wrap that up to this driven, intelligent, articulate, competitive, top salesperson in the medical industry, now running multiple businesses, this sort of thing. How does all that make Allie Warren? Like, how did all of that? And you said 2020. Some of this stuff is still a fresh wound. This is 4 years ago. And then you
Mhm.
said your dad passed away a year and a half after that. So your dad passed away somewhere in 2021 or
21. Yeah.
2022, right? So,
Yeah.
but all of that built Allie Warren in 2024, who seems to be, now everybody's got their story and everybody's got the things that have molded and shaped them. But how does all of that build Allie Warren in 2024 to where you are today, where you just seem to be killing it?
Yeah. So in part one of this podcast, we talked
Yeah.
about, the challenges with the job, and then, that brief stint with an abusive boyfriend. And I think what I know now is not it taught me how to surrender and like
Mm.
not resist anymore because like I said, I was fighting things that weren't up to me, and I was people pleasing and disassociating and all the things. And I think now I know when to walk away. I know when to
Mm.
take no for an answer, because I've experienced pretty much in every aspect of my life how, not doing that has served me poorly.
Mm. Good for you,
Yep.
right?
Yeah.
there's so much. I really appreciate this conversation. You being so open and vulnerable with all this, and I think that being self-aware enough to know what molds you and shapes you. Things happen for you and not to you, to steal a
Mhm.
phrase from one of my friends, right? This is, to try to look at everything as serving you and building you, that there is something greater happening.
Yep.
If you're spiritual in nature, that, we've all heard the phrase, God's only going to give you what you can handle. So you clearly
Mhm.
you were handling things to help you. Is not to go all the way back. And I told you we go longer than 45 minutes. And if you
I
if you
know.
have a hard stop, let me know. Your
No, I'm like,
grandma that you hold in such high esteem, that has done so well, that had these 9 kids and to steal my own phrase, that she had her greatness while she may have been in the mud at times, right?
mhm.
Is that your dad's mom?
Yes.
That is your dad's mom.
Mhm.
So you I mean, so that the things that your dad was dealing with, you didn't see, like your grandma was just rolling and dealing with things and led a certain resilience in life. And she lived to a standard. Your
Yep.
grandma lives to a standard and all that your dad just didn't have, right? Is that fair? Like you talk
It's
about the stuff that
yeah.
trickles down and that some things you're just born with. Your grandma had some of this, and maybe it sounds like your dad was killing it professionally in many regards, right? So maybe he had a lot of this, but there were just certain attributes where maybe he was just low on the scale that allowed him to get into that world. But maybe he was off the charts with certain attributes that he got from your grandma. It sounds like, because professionally, it sounds like he was killing it.
Yeah, so I think I mentioned earlier, my dad was the youngest of 9. He was 11
Yeah.
when his dad left, and my grandma had to kick it into overdrive and wear both hats.
Mm,
She just retired at the age of 90. Like, she is a boss.
mm,
And so, as you can imagine, like, my dad kind of had to raise himself, and I always said he never really
mm.
matured emotionally past the age of
Yeah.
11, right? He didn't know how to love. He didn't have empathy. Like,
Yeah.
I think he was stuck there mentally, like with his inner child, and he projected that onto us in a lot of ways. And I think it just comes from all of his abandonment issues. And think about it, when my dad was my age, like, it was very taboo to talk about these things. Now it's
Sure.
like,
Sure.
trauma is like a buzzword, right? Um, so I think that the vessel that my dad was in just wasn't conducive to his healing. And I love my grandma, but she had to bury a lot too and not
Yeah.
show her
Right.
emotions. And so I think part of that,
Right.
my dad was the same way. He never wanted to talk about anything outside of like business or tangible things. Um, so that's kind of the
Yeah.
gist of my
It's just
dad's.
interesting. You have me thinking about a lot of things. This conversation will carry with me for a bit, but you have me thinking about your dad as an 11-year-old. And if I got this wrong from what I heard you say,
Yeah,
his dad left your grandma when he was 11,
correct.
right? So I'm just going to paint the picture in my head that things from 0 to 11 or whatever it might be, that your grandpa, your
Hmm.
grandma's husband, was maybe not a good guy, or something
Right.
happened. I shouldn't say he's not a good. I don't know what happened, but grandma
Mhm.
sounds like she's queen, and
Yeah.
maybe things just weren't good there. So your dad from 0 to 11 had this modeling
Hmm.
of a husband, of a
Hmm.
father, and then he raises himself, or however that works, from 11 to 20 to 21 to 25, whenever it is. And the modeling was, this is the way things should be, or this is the way to behave and perform, and this is the way to fulfill these roles, as opposed to, this is not the way to do things,
Right.
right? This is not at all the way to do things, but he replicates that model. And
Yep.
then, and then it happens to you,
Yep.
essentially. Not the same thing, but it's replicated, right? So I'm just really driven, and I've got 3 children. But you just have me thinking about modeling the right way to be a husband, the right way to be a father. You lit up when you said softball was great because my parents were present, and
Right.
that made you smile, right? Somebody told me the greatest gift we can give our children is to be present, to be there, to be available. My wife and I do and I will say this arrogantly, we are great at being present. Like we don't miss anything. We don't miss anything, because that is the greatest gift we feel we can give our children.
Right.
So that's, you just have me thinking a lot about modeling right now. There's the story of an alcoholic father with 2 children, and one goes to become an alcoholic, and one never touches alcohol their whole life. And there's more to the story, but then they asked both these children, why are you the way you are? And they both have the same answer: because of my father. Right. Like, but they both have different lives. Like one says, hey, this is what my dad did, so I do it. And the other one is that my dad did this and I want no part of it. And so that's why we are. But it's interesting how much, but then to take it from, to pivot off that, then there's no great way to pivot off your story, because it's such a good story. And I really appreciate you sharing it. But all that prepped you for your greatness now with what you're doing now. And, the modeling that you have done now to build your own businesses and do all that. I'm just curious, like, all of that built up the attributes that it takes for your next round, for this round that you're on of starting, you left your job. And I guess after the last time we spoke, the thing that I thought about in regards to our conversation was that leap you took from, doing really well, being very valuable, contributing to something significant, financially probably doing very well, all this sort of stuff, to now I'm doing my own thing. I'm not only going to do my own thing, I'm going to do 2 of these things. I'm going to start my own interior design type business, and I'm also going to run this consulting business. And now I have maybe no paychecks coming in. Everything that you just discussed led you to who you are now, of crushing it and killing it and being able to believe in yourself and have confidence in yourself that you can do anything that you put your mind to. Did all that build up to what you're doing now and who you are now and what you're able to achieve now?
Yeah, I'm a firm believer that you can't fight timing. If you try to fight the timing of your destiny, you're just going to delay, the destination that you're working toward, or, read the timeline to reach that destination. So I think that it all had to happen, and it all had to happen in the timing that it did. But it's meant to serve me with respect to, like, my hard days, when I look back and say, I've been through way worse. Like, this pales in comparison. Me, like, worrying about, oh my gosh, am I going to get a check in the mail this month or not? I'd rather have that problem all day long than the problems I've had to overcome prior to. So I think it's just conditioned me to be able to handle this level of pressure. And again, the outcome is up to me. Therefore, I know I'm in the right lane.
What a great phrase. Right. You got your lemon phrase. That's good. But your outcome is up to you. And I really, that's a great phrase. But when I started this podcast many years ago, and it's gone through a couple transformations, I reached out to a gentleman that I admired and looked up to, thinking he wouldn't respond to me at all. And he was on the podcast, a guy named Alan Stein Jr., who's in the coaching space as well, speaking space, has actually been on Ben Newman's podcast, The Burn, been on Ed Milet's show. But he was on my show first. And I reached out to him, and we had some connections. And I remember telling him right at the introduction, I said, I'm a big country music guy. I love country music. My favorite thing to do is to go to country music concerts. And I love going to, dive bars and seeing a band that is going to be really good. And that band's going to end up on a big stage and all that. And I said, Alan, you are going to be the same way. You're starting on my show. This is the corner bar episode. I am the corner bar, and you're going to crush it. I said, but you will be on the biggest stages. And I said, because I feel like to my core, to my bones, I feel like I know how this is going to roll for you. And then since then, he has crushed it. And I bring that up simply because, man, I just know you're going to crush it. I just know, like, I'm so excited to be connected with you. I'm super excited to follow you on Instagram and see these great things you're doing. because I like to my core, I feel like I know how this is going to turn out, right? You are responsible for your outcome and you know what you want to do and you know you're going to do it. But there's just part of me going, man, shit, she's going to do it. And it's going to be fun. Like there's nothing greater than watching somebody just go do it and just crush it. And yeah, I'm not at all suggesting you're at the bottom right now, but like, hey, we're here now. And like 2 years, George, this is going to be amazing. And you won't even believe where I'm going to end up. And I believe it. I believe it. And that's awesome. I'm super excited. So I don't want to do the wrap up that we did the last time of where you see yourself like, and all that sort of stuff. We do have all your show notes. I just want to really thank you for this. Like, being a part of this group with Ben Newman has been really good. It's really good because the content of Ben Newman. It's really good to just start to build a network. It's really good to be around people that are driven, action oriented, hopefully holding, I don't know if I'm like being held accountable. Like nobody's calling me up saying, you said you were going to do this. Did you do that? No, but it's the accountability of a group saying, hey, people are shouting out what they're doing and what they're excited about and how it's impacting them, which then leads me to like, shit, I got to do this too. Like I'm capable of this. And these people are doing these great things. And so there's this kind of, ancillary, ripple effect accountability of I can do it too, or I need to report on what I'm doing. So it's really been great, but it's been phenomenal to meet you and other people and be able to have these conversations because it's all about, leveling up and getting better. And the one thing I've said, and then I'll quiet down and let you finish up here. But the one thing I've said in our podcast for years, and I heard it from a very successful coach, is there's only two things that change your life. And that's the books you read and the people you meet. And that's why I made a huge commitment to reading in 2024. And that's why meeting people like you and having these conversations with you, like this is impactful. This is really impactful for me as a parent, as a husband, and as hopefully a business owner, as I, try to make this leap that you're making. So I say all that to say, thank you for your time. You've spent about 2 hours with me now. So I really appreciate it.
Yeah, no, I'm actually really looking forward to interviewing you and understanding your parenting style and how you've had to manage your own dynamics because, I've always just like wondered like how people deal with, the co-parenting and things like that and the things that come up. Because mine was a really extreme case, but then I saw the opposite where, you have co-parents that get along perfectly well and they celebrate holidays together. So I just like to understand kind of how these dynamics work and if mine was the standard or whatever. But in any case, I will echo what you say, like about just the value that I extract from the group because I'm on the come up again, right? Like, I don't think it's like I'm like down here or anything, but I'm on a different come up than I was before. I'm leveling up. And oftentimes when you're at this level and you're around people that are, they're at the higher end of that level, you might think that you're dealing with things that they're not dealing with, like the imposter syndrome. And what I've learned from you is that like, I'm not unique in that. We all have that. And it's like an equalizer. So I realized like, it doesn't matter what level you're at, you're still going to have to exercise these muscles and overcome these fears. And the higher that you go, the harder you're going to have to work to overcome them. Right.
Yes.
So I think that's really what I'm getting from this group more than anything. And so, I just really appreciate you giving me the opportunity and the time. And
no, I've enjoyed this a lot. So, so thank you. And
awesome.
For everybody, listen, I appreciate everybody if you've made it this far, good for you. It's an hour and 13, but this has gone by really fast. And I've really appreciated this. I'm looking forward to chopping this up and putting this out on Instagram and doing all that sort of stuff and getting, it's all really good. So like when you throw it into some software and say, give me the good stuff here, it's probably going to give me an hour and 13 minutes of content. So it's really been great, but thanks. If you make it this far, thank you. This will be out on YouTube, all of Allie's contact information. If you need to track her down, it will be on the show notes as well. Her LinkedIn and Instagram and Twitter and what other platforms that she might be on. I'll make sure to get those all in there. But Allie, thank you so much again. It's Wednesday and What a great Wednesday it's been. We had our stuff with Ben Newman this morning, and I get this hour and a half here. So I've definitely been fed some great things today. So thank you very much for all that.
Thank you.
All right. Thank you, everybody. And with the YouTube stuff, just, click like, subscribe, share, do all that sort of stuff that everybody tells you to do. And we appreciate everybody listening to this. Thank you so much, Allie.
Thanks.